Welcome to this video. I'm beginning Rails 8, and in this video, we're going to create a controller without the scaffold. Now, first, we're going to create our task model, and we're going to see how we can interact with that model, and then we're going to create our controller and views. Now, it's important that you understand RESTful routing, so there's another video I did that discusses RESTful routing, and I'll include a link to that in the description below. So the first thing we're going to do is use the Rails generator to generate us our model. So that's bin Rails G, and we want to create a model. And again, I'm going to create a task model. And the same as the scaffold, I'm going to use the title for my task, and that is a string type. And if you know that you're going to use a string type, then of course you don't have to put the type afterwards. Then a due date, which is a date time, and a priority. And again, before you run that, you want to make sure you spell everything right because it does generate code for you. And if you misspell something, then you have to go to lots of places to fix it. But just like last time, it created us a migration to be able to create this table in our database. It also created us our model file, which doesn't have anything in it, and it created some test files for us. And we can go ahead and run the migration with bin rels db migrate. On a model view controller framework, the model is supposed to be UI independent. So it doesn't matter which UI we use. We can use a website to be our UI like we're doing in Ruby on Rails, but maybe it can also be a mobile application or it can be a desktop application, and it can even be something that you do in the terminal window. So our models are completely UI independent, and I'm going to show you how we can interact with the models using Ruby. And we're going to go into the console. So this is bin rels C, and that's for console right here. And what this does is it gets us into an interactive Ruby environment with our application loaded in. So we got our task model loaded in. Now, the first thing that we might want to do is instantiate a new task. So I could see t equals task.new. And this is just like what you would say in Java, task t equals a new task. So this instantiates a new task. And if we look at this task, we can see that all of the fields are blank. And we can go ahead and start filling them out. So we can say t.title equals a console task. And then t.due date equals time dot zone dot now, and then we can add 2 hours. And then we can say t dot priority equals 3. And then we can print that task out and we can see that our fields are set. We still don't have an ID and we still don't have a created at or an updated at time. That's because this task still only lives in memory. We need to write a SQL statement to save this task into our database. And we don't have to write any of the SQL statements. This task knows how to save itself in the database. The one method is t.persisted. And what this does is it returns true or false if this task is already saved in the database or not. So this is saying false, this is not saved in the database. So if I were to exit this console, this task would go away, it would never come back. But we can say t.save, and you can see the SQL statement that automatically got written to save this in our database. And then it also returns us true, saying it was successfully saved in the database. Printing T back out, we can see that T now has a title, and we can see that there are created at and updated at timestamps automatically added in. And we can also say T.persisted, and we can see now it returns true because the task has been saved in the database. Now, let's say we go ahead and modify the task. Well, first we'll exit out of the console. So this erases everything that was in memory, but it keeps the stuff that was in the database. And now we re-enter the console. If we want to get the task back, there are some methods. We can go task.all, which returns all tasks. And you can see the SQL statement that got written. And there's only one task, but see these brackets right here indicate that this is an array of tasks with only one task inside. We can also go task.first, and it loads the first task out. There's also task.last that loads the last task out of the database. So that's different ways that we can query a database. We can also say task.find and pass in the ID, and that returns us the first task. And we can also write kind of more of a SQL statement, task.where, and we could say title is equal to console task. And that returns a SQL statement. If you notice, we've got the brackets here. So this is an array of every task that matched our where clause. Let's go ahead and pull that task back out with and save it in a new variable by saying t equals task dot first. And now we could go ahead and modify it. We could see t dot title equals an edited console task. Now t dot persisted still returns true because this task is in the database, but the in-memory task, the task that's named T, has some modifications that have not yet been saved to the database. And to save those, we can go t.save again. And again, this returns true, but you can see this time, because it knew the task wasn't saved in the database, or that the task has already been saved in the database, it writes an update SQL statement instead of an insert SQL statement. And now let's create a task two is equal to a new task, and we can say t2.title. T2.title is delete me, and we can go t2.save. So now the task is saved in the database, and if we want to delete the task out of the database, we just go to t2.destroy, and now it deleted that task. Now let's go ahead and add some validations into our task. Just like last time, we'll validate the presence of the title. We'll also validate the presence of the due date and the priority. We'll make sure they have a priority and that it's a number between 1 and 5. Now, just because we modified this code and saved it, that doesn't mean the console picks it up. Each time you make changes to your code in the console, you need to either quit and restart the console to pick up the changes to the code, or you can just go reload, exclamation mark, and it should reload all of your code. Now, however, the tasks that we already have in memory, like T right here, this might not have picked up this new code, so you'd want to pull it out of the database again. But I'll just go ahead and say T equals a new task, and then we'll just try to run t.save. And you can see that it's false. There's no SQL statement. It actually didn't save this task in the database. And then we can go t.errors and see why this task wasn't saved in the database. And we can see all the different errors that show up. And that's how our validations, when we run our validations, when we try to save it, the errors get attached to our task model. And we pass this to the form, and that's how the form is able to print up the errors on why it couldn't save the task. So now that we're done playing with the tasks in the console, let's start creating our user interface by creating a controller. So to create our controller, we'll use our Rails generator, which has been Rails G, and this time we're going to create a controller. And make sure you call it the plural name of your entity instead of the singular name. So when you make your model, you want it to be a singular name. And when you make the controller, you want it to be plural. And for now, we'll just do the index action. If you remember from your RESTful routing, the index action is the view that should show all of the tasks that are in the database. So that generated us a new controller that we can have with an index action. And also, if you look in your views, we have a tasks folder with the index view inside of it. And you can see that it added this new line up here, which we want to take out. And we're going to replace that with resources and make sure there's an S on that and tasks. And that will map up all 7 methods to the controller, all 7 methods that will act on tasks. So in our index action, we'll go ahead and say at tasks equal task.all. And as you know from our time on the console, this will pull all the tasks out of the database and return an array of tasks. Now in the task view in the index action, we can go ahead and edit this. We can use our title helper we set up in the last video and set a title. And after we have the title helper, we can loop through each task. So this is tasks.each, and now this is the name of each task. And we can go ahead and create a div tag for that task. We're going to add an ID on here, and this will be task underscore and the ID of that task. And then also the class, we'll add that on there. And then we're just printing out the task title, due date, and priority. And we're doing this in a loop. And now we can see if that all worked by putting a slash and going to tasks. So this is the task index path, and you can see that we have our task that we created in the console being printed out. And now here is a better way to print dates so that it's in the current time zone of the user and also a short format. And remember, if you want to, you also have the created at and the updated at. If you want to print those out in here, you can as well. And you can see that our date is a little bit more readable now. Next, let's add tasks into our navigation bar. And also let's create a link so that we can create new task, a button here that we can click on. So there's a form to create a new task. Now we have our navigation that we set up in our last video, and we'll just go ahead and add a new nav link in, call it tasks, and have that go to the tasks. And so now when we go home, now we have tasks and the about page. If we want to see our tasks, we can see them here. So on our task index page, we can go ahead and add that button so that we can create new tasks. And we can use the link to helper to create this link. And then by adding a class on here, the button class and button primary, that'll make a blue button that we can click on to create new tasks. And refreshing, here's that blue button. And we go here and it says unknown action. The new action cannot be found for the task controller. So the RESTful routing is happening, but I never created a new method to respond to this action. So back in the task controller, I'll create this new method right here, and I'll say at task equals a new task. Now this only creates a task in memory that we're going to use to create our form, but we're not going to save this task in the database, at least not yet. So refreshing, now it's complaining that there is no view for this new method. So we have the new method, but there's no view for it to be able to draw up some HTML. So down in our views tasks folder, we'll go ahead and create a new file and we'll call it new.html.erb. And here's where we'll create a form for this task. And this is why the controller needed to create a task. And it's going to use this to generate the right URL to submit the form for. And now Rails has this form builder that will create a form for us. So it's form for, and it's our method right here, or our task that we created in the controller. And F is now a form builder that we can add text fields onto. And refreshing, we have this new form here. Of course, we don't have a submit button and there's no labels. Bootstrap does have a lot of nice stuff that we can do in our forms right here to make our forms look really nice. We just have to print out a lot of HTML for it. Now, the good thing with Rails is they really believe in this do not repeat yourself. It's a really tedious to create forms. So luckily, there's a gem that we can include in our application. This is called Bootstrap Form that can generate forms really easily. So we have this much code that we need to type in, and you can see that it will generate all of this for us so that we don't have to type out a lot of HTML in our code. So we're going to go into our gem file and we're going to add this in. And now we can read through this README. How we're going to install the gem is we're going to copy this line right here, and we're going to put that in our gem file. And whenever you add something into your gem file, we need to quit our server by pressing Control C, and then we'll just run the bundle command, which should install that gem. And once the bundle file is installed, then we can relaunch our server. To make sure we get to use that gem, we do need to change this method to Bootstrap Form for, and that will mean that our fields will get wrapped in that Bootstrap styling. So we have a text field, and we can also add in our other fields and make sure we're using the date field for the due date and a number field for the priority. We also have a submit button that says create task, and we're going to use the button and the button primary. By the way, these come from Bootstrap and they make nice buttons for us to press. And refreshing our page, now we have a pretty nice form on our page, and we could go ahead and fill out a task. And I also noticed that my due date, it doesn't allow for me to set a time, and we can fix that by using a date time field instead of just a date field. And now refreshing, we have a date and a time. So let's go ahead and create our task. And when I click create task, it looks like nothing happens. Everything just disappears. So if we go through our logs and our application right here, we can scroll up and you can see that we kind of have a stack trace, an error stack trace. So we have to scroll up to the very beginning, and it says that action create could not be found for the task controller. So just like there was no new method, there was no create method. So in our controller, we'll go ahead and create a new task, but we'll create a task using the params. Now this is what we call mass assignment. So instead of saying task.title equals, task.duedate equals, and task.priority equals one at a time, we can just do one line of code and assign everything. Now, if you notice, we got the colon task here. If we inspect our HTML, if you notice the name that gets sent is task, and it looks like we kind of have an array thing here with title inside of it. So when we say params colon task, it's getting all the things that have to do with tasks so that we can make the mass assignment. Now, the problem with mass assignment is there are some security concerns because anybody can come in here in their inspector, they can add some more HTML fields. And let's say they're editing their user account, they can try adding fields like admin and saying true so that when we do the mass assignment, we could accidentally allow the user to become an admin when we don't want them to. So what we need to do is whitelist and only list out the stuff that we want the user to be able to set. And so we say expect. So we're saying that we expect the task with a title, due date, and priority, and that means that anything else they try to send along the way will get erased from our parameters before we go to create a new task. Now we're going to use this params right here multiple times, like when we edit it. So usually what we'll do is we'll create in a private method, or in the private area, we'll create a method called task params. So in this private method, we'll put in our params expect right here, and then we'll call this method right here. And I know this doesn't really look like a method call because you don't see the parentheses, but remember in Ruby, parentheses are optional. This is actually a method call as well, and we're passing in the task params to it. So now that we're creating the new task, if we just create it, it won't get saved in the database. So we'll go ahead and try to save that. If at task.save, and this means it worked. So what we probably want to do is redirect the user to the tasks path so they can see all the tasks. And this is where our flash messages come in. We can add a notice saying task created. Now, if the save fails, what should we do? What we want to do is present them with a form that they can fill out or where they can fix all their errors. Now, we'll go ahead and just render new. So this is not a method call to new. We're not calling new. What we're doing is we're saying, let's choose the new view in this task folder. And remember, the new view uses the at task to be able to drop the form. But this task now has all of those validation errors that we saw on the console attached to it. So the form can now display the errors. Now, another thing that we need to do is return a status code saying that didn't work for unprocessable content. That means we couldn't save our content in the database. And this will let our JavaScript know on the other side that's kind of doing a lot of stuff for us in the background that that the save didn't work. So now let's go ahead and try to create a task. Now, because we have those required fields on here, we actually can't submit the form until we fill some stuff out. And you can even see that our HTML won't just let us submit anything that's not in the right range. But just so that we could see that our validations are working, I'm going to temporarily disable this thing. So I'm going to remove the range on this field. And then I'm going to refresh the page and try to create this task with a priority that is not in range. And now we could see that we get this validation error that 7 must be less than or equal to 5. And we could go ahead and try to create the priority in the range. And we create it. And now we see this new task that we created. And we even have our flash message showing up. Now it would be nice to have links to see each task on its own page. And to get that, we need to implement the show view. Here in the index view, we have our task title, and we'll just turn this title into a link by adding the link to helper method, and then we'll print out the title, and where will it go? It'll go to the task path, and we need to pass in the task so that it can include the ID in the URL. And refreshing, we'll see that now we have links, but when I try to click on the link, the show action is not found in the task controller. So we'll go ahead and create the show action. And what we'll do is we'll load the task out of the database by doing the task.find and use the params that have the ID, and this is the ID in the URL. So we're going to try to pull that task out of the database. And if it works, we'll just go down here and we'll select the show view. So we need to add a show.html.erb in here. And now it might be tempting to copy and paste this code into our show view, but we don't want to do that. Copying and pasting usually isn't a good idea. Rails has a better way where we can create a new file, and this is called a partial. So it's underscore task.html.erb. And now we could take this code out of the index view and paste it into the partial. And now we got a reusable partial that we can use both in the index view and the show view. So back in the index view, to get that to show up, we just make a render call and we pass the task in. And this is a little bit of introspection going on that Ruby on Rails does. It asks the render, asks its parameter, what type are you? And it says, I'm a task. So automatically we go to the tasks folder in our views looking for a task partial. Now in our show view, we can add a title on here, and then we can also print out a render call, and we can pass in the at task this time. And it has to be at task because that's what our controller sets it as. It sets it as at task. So now the show view will show there. It'll also be nice to have like a backlink that will take us back to see all tasks. But that done, when we refresh, we got a single view of a single task, and we can click the back button and see all of our tasks. The only thing is we have this link here and it just goes to the same page right here, and that's in our partial. What if we only want that link to show up when we're on our index view? And there is another helper called link to unless current. So it looks at this link and sees if that's the same link that we're on, and then it won't include the link. So when we refresh on our index view, we have the link, but when we click on it for a show view, the link's not there. Well, we have our index view, our show view, we can create new tasks, but let's go ahead and create a way to edit a task. So on the show view, we need an edit button. So we can just add a link to edit the task. We're going to do the edit task path. We have to pass in the task so it can figure out or get the ID to make the URL. We'll also use the button's secondary, and this comes from Bootstrap. It'll give us a gray button. And refreshing, we have our edit button, but when we click on it, the edit action could not be found for the task controller. So now we'll add that edit method in, and what we need to do is we need to pull the task out of the database, exactly what the show action does. So of course, you might be tempted to copy and paste that, but since we're going to do this for the edit and also the edit processing, which is to actually update the task, and also our destroy, let's go ahead and create a method that will load the task out. So we'll call this load task and paste that in here. And now we can call the load task method both in the show view and the edit view. But of course, this is one line of code. We'll have to put load task in both of those. So it doesn't save us too much, but that's where we get before filters. And we could say before action, we'll call the load task method. And so that means before any of these get called, it'll call the load task method and we'll set that there. Of course, we don't want to do that on the new or the index, the new, or the create. So we'll just do an accept index, new, or create. So that means every action that we call in this controller will call the load task method before the method gets called, except for the index, the new, and the create methods. So now our edit method is really small along with our show method. And just to show you, we didn't break the show method, it's still working. Now the edit method is there, but there is no view. So go ahead and create a new file for our edit view. And once again, you might be tempted to copy and paste this form into your edit page, but copy and pasting really isn't a good idea. Instead, let's go ahead and create a partial for our form. And then we'll take our new view, our new task, we'll cut that out and we'll paste it into our form. And in our new view, we'll go ahead and render the form. And just in case, if we want a back button, we can go ahead and add that by adding a link to cancel, and that'll go back to the tasks path. So now our new task form is still there. And then we can go view one task, and then we can go edit the task. There's nothing in our partial. And in our edit view, we'll set the title, we'll render the same form, and with a link to cancel. And refreshing, we have it. The only confusing thing here is the create task right here. We're not creating a task, we're editing a task. But if I change it here, I'll also change it for our new view, and it will say edit task in our new view, which will also be confusing. So what we'll do is we'll use the URLs or the Ruby ternary operator, and a ternary operator is an if statement in one line. So if the task is persisted, that means it's saved in the database, and then this is the ternary operator right here. We'll print out update task, and if not, we'll print out create task. And refreshing, now it says update task when we're trying to edit a task. And when we try to create a new task, it says create task. Let's go ahead and try to edit this task. We'll just say first controller edited. And you can see it didn't seem like anything happened. And if we look in our logs, we can see that the update action is not found on our task controller. And we'll go ahead and add the update method. Now you can see that we saved ourselves some time by writing these methods here. First of all, the update method, before it gets called, is going to load the task. It's going to call the load task method. So that's going to set our task. So it's already loaded out of the database. We're using our task params method to make sure we whitelist all the parameters that shouldn't be changed. And then if the update it has succeeded, we'll redirect to the task with a notice task updated. Now, this is another cool thing using introspection. The redirect to method asks its parameter that it received, what kind of thing are you? And it says, oh, I'm a task. And it's smart enough to grab the ID out of the task and create a URL or redirect us right to the um, task show page with a notice that the task is updated. And if we didn't, if any of the validation errors failed, then we'll go back to the edit page with an unprocessable content. So of course we can first try to take away the title, but you could see that it said that we have to fill out that, and that's our browser that's causing us to do that. But let's say we take the priority and take it out of range, we could see that we still get that validation error. We can put it back into range, and we can put edited here. And if we update our task, we could see that we got our flash message saying the task is updated, and it's updated there too. Okay, finally, we just need to create a way to delete a task. Now, we need to make sure that the HTTP delete method is called so that we can call the destroy method in the controller. And to be able to do that, we need to use button to instead of link to. That way, a little bit of JavaScript can take over and it can send a delete request. We'll make sure that we're doing the delete method. And again, some JavaScript is going to take over and send this with a delete method. And also the same JavaScript will pop up a confirm message saying, are you sure? By the way, Turbo is a library in Rails that makes our pages load faster through JavaScript and Ajax. So this is how we get our messages to pop up. And we'll also add a class to make our button red. And now we have this red button. When we click it, we get an Are you sure pop-up. If we said cancel, nothing happens. But if we click it and we click OK, then our task should get deleted. Once again, our destroy method is not found in the task controller. So once again, the destroy, we got the at task automatically gets called with the before action filter. And so all we have to do is say at task dot destroy. And when we're done, we'll just redirect them to the task's path with a maybe an alert this time, task deleted. So now we'll go ahead and see what happens when we delete our task. It says, are you sure? We click OK. We're back on our index page with all of our tasks, and it said task deleted. And you can see that task is no longer in the database. So that does it for now. We have a controller where we can create new tasks, we can see them, we can edit them, and we can delete them.